Basdeo Panday was the fifth Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, serving between 1995 and 2001. The longest-serving leader of the opposition, he is best known for representing the working class and for being at the forefront of the struggle for unity.
The great emotional satisfaction you get when you do something and you know you have made people happy. You do something to make people happy. Emotional satisfaction. I got enormous emotional satisfaction from pulling sugar, feeling of excruciating poverty. Right? Lift them up.
Born on May 25, 1933, in St. Julian Village, South Trinidad, Basdeo Panday came from a peasant farming background. His personal journey was one of struggle from an early age.
Sometime in my life, and I can't remember when, I think it was things when I had to clean the mule pen and the filth and the grime and so on. And I would think, I'd be thinking, and it dawned on me sometime early in my life that the way out of this poverty was education. Education was the answer. And I didn't know at that time how and when and why this education would come. And during that time, I lived like every other child in the village, going to school, taking care of the animals, the goats and the cows and so on and so forth, helping your parents on weekends and after school. And then something happened, and this is my father's uncle, a man by the name of J.H. Dubé, who was a clerk to the solicitor's firm of Hobson's, which was on the San Fernando Promenade, on the corner there. And he was clerk there, my father's uncle, Mr. Dubé, and he asked my father to send me to San Fernando to stay with him, and he sent me to Presentation College, and that's how I happened to have got a secondary education.
By age 11, after attending primary school, the young Basdeo was given the opportunity to go to secondary school. By 1951, he had earned a senior Cambridge certificate, but his future was uncertain.
What happened was that I couldn't get a job, and I got a job as a cane weigher. Weighing canes at the Williamsville estate. And I worked there for one crop season, and that was the crop season, I think, must have been of 1951 or thereabouts. And after that, I got a job as a teacher in one of the Arya Pratinity Sabha schools. It was the Siram Memorial Vedic School, and I taught there for a while. Incidentally, I used to ride a motorcycle in those days. I have a broken finger to prove it as well. And while teaching there, I took this civil service entrance exams, and I passed that and got a job as a second-class clerk at the San Fernando Magistracy. And I became the note taker. In those days, we'd take the notes of the witnesses, write them longhand. And I became a note taker in the courts, and actually took notes with Mr. Hassanandi, who was a magistrate at the time, who later became a judge and the president of the country. I took notes with Errol Rupner-Ryan, who became the Solicitor General. Took notes with a lot of magistrates. And while doing all of that, I remember another thing. When I became a teacher, I got $84 a month. And when I started working in the public service, I got $150 $4 a month. And it is upon that income that I was able not only to live and help my parents and so on, but I was able to save up $500 over a long period of time. By that time it was 1957, and I decided that I was going to England to study law. My parents were so poor, they couldn't afford to give me any money. They couldn't afford to sustain me at school.
With little money but much determination, he set out on a long journey to England.
I went to London by the cheapest method which was available, and that is I went by a cargo boat, and an Italian cargo boat. An Italian cargo boat that went from Port Spain and went to Tenerife and all those places, ended up in Geneva. And from Geneva, took Calais by train, and then to Southampton by ferry, and then to train by London. It took 14 days to reach London. And I remember one thing which reminds me somewhat of the poverty, is when my mother came to me, and I don't know how she found out. She said, "Son, I understand you're going third class." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because there are no fourth class, that's all."
Without the means to begin studying, the self-motivated Panday sought work.
I landed in London with $100 in my pocket, which was 20 pounds in those days. And I had two friends who met me and who were living in London, and they just put another bed in this little room, and I stayed with them. And while there, of course, I began working, and I worked with the building industry as a labourer. I actually worked as an electrician's mate at one time. Then, having done that for several months, I couldn't study because the work at the building sites was too hard. You couldn't work and study in the night at all. I eventually got a job as a clerk with the London County Council. That enabled me to start to fulfill the dream of becoming a lawyer, because I went to London because I wanted to study law.
But the dream was not yet within his grasp.
I began working at the London County Council, but I needed, I think, £102 in order to deposit with the Lincoln's Inn before I could study law. I didn't have £102, so that working at the London County Council, saving as much as I can, I also attended night school. And at the night school I attended was a drama school. So I attended a drama school at evenings and nights for 2 years. Got a diploma in drama, actually. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was that I began getting parts on British television, BBC, ITV as it was then. Several small parts, and eventually, so I had enough money, £102 to deposit. So I deposited this with the Lincoln's Inn, and couldn't yet begin to study law because I'm doing drama. When I decided I was going to study drama, I wasn't going to study drama to become an actor. I wanted to study drama to become a good lawyer, because I admired the great orators of that day, Sir Edward Marshall Hall and guys like that. They were tremendous fellows, great oratory. And I thought that a lot of being a good lawyer is being to perform really like a good actor. And that's the reason I went to drama school, not to be an actor. It turned out to be one for a time. I never thought that going to drama school would help me in another profession, that was politics.
Soon he developed an acting career which funded his legal studies.
When I qualified, when I left drama school and I began getting some small parts and so on, I began studying law. But the big break came in 1961 when I got a part in a play at the West End in London, at the Savoy Theatre. And that play ran for a year. So it meant that every night I'd go to the theatre, and twice on Wednesdays and Saturdays when we did a matinee as well. And but I was able now. First I was working in the day and studying in the night. And now I began working in the night. So I started studying in the day. And the play ran from about January 1961 to about December 1961. And by the time the play had closed, I had finished part one of the bar.
Getting closer to fulfilling his dream, Panday then set an extraordinary goal: to pass his final exams in 6 months.
And because I had worked at the theatre, I now had enough money to sustain me for about 6 months. And I decided that I was going to pass the bar finals in those 6 months. And I decided I wouldn't go to lectures, because if I went to lectures, that would take a long period. They have a way of doing things, a whole semester to do an exam. But in those days, the law schools would have exams twice or 3 times per year, in May, I think, and September and December. So I decided I was going to take the May exams, and I went to a bookshop in Chancery Lane in London called Wiley's, and they used to rent the books, and I rented all the law books for the part 2 of the bar finals, and I took them home and I began to read them from cover to cover, and I studied something like 18 hours a day. I eventually sat the bar exam in May, June, can't remember, and passed.
In 1962, Basdeo Panday had attained his law degree, yet it was surprisingly an anticlimax.
After I passed the law, I recall very well, going to the Inns of Court, looking on the board, seeing my name there, coming out to the Inns of Court, and feeling, what was the difference? I didn't feel educated. Yesterday, I wasn't a lawyer. Today, I'm a lawyer, but I don't feel that I'm educated. So that thirst for education is what was prompting that kind of feeling, I guess.
By this time, Panday had received a grant from the London County Council, so he promptly enrolled in London University. In 1965, he graduated with a BSc in Economics and a minor in Political Science, and was also offered a Commonwealth postgraduate scholarship at the Delhi School of Economics.
And I decided, well, I had been away for so long that instead of going directly to India, I would come home and see my parents, and then I would go back. I would go to India. And that coming home changed my life completely.
Indeed, beyond reuniting with family, Panday soon developed a keen interest in the politics of the day.
But when I came here, I found Stephen Morage, C.L.R. James, Jack Kelshaw, and people like that, engaged in a struggle against the PNM government that was trying to introduce the ISA, the Industrial Stabilization Act, which they regarded as anti-worker. I think it restricted the right to strike, so that they were carrying out this struggle on behalf of the workers.
After attending a public meeting in Princestown and speaking to Stephen Maharaj, Panday found himself at a crossroad. It was the beginning of his struggle with the working class.
He said, here we are, engaged in a struggle for the workers, right? For people like your parents, class of people from whom your parents came, from whom you came, and so on. I went home, but those words began to haunt me. Because he said, why don't you stay and struggle with us? And I went home and I really couldn't rest. Those words began to haunt me. And I gave up the search. And I joined their struggle. I set up legal practice in San Fernando, in Kelshaw's building. And I became the lawyer to several unions.
The launch of Basdeo Panday's legal career was closely aligned to the trade union movement.
I represent them there because I had a knowledge of both law and economics. So I represented about 9 unions. I became the lawyer for 9 unions. I was lawyer for the OWTU. I was lawyer for the OWTU, the Transport and Industrial Workers Union under Joe Young, Francis Beddoes, Food, Allied and Beverages Union, lots of them. And trouble is, I couldn't confine myself to being their lawyer. And I began getting involved in their struggles. So when they were striking and marching and this and that, I striking and marching and so on with them. And getting locked up and so on, getting arrested for all kinds of things.
Championing the cause of the unions, Panday's popularity among the working class catapulted him to becoming a union leader himself.
When Badius died in 1972, there was a vacuum. And the Secretary of the Trade Union, Ram Pratap Singh, I think was his name. Yes, Ram Pratap Singh was his name. He invited me to become president. So they held the elections and so on. Eventually, I became the president of the Sugar Union in 1973. May 1973, 6th May 1973, I think it was. And began struggling for the workers.
Basdeo Panday, Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, serving between 1995 and 1. The longest-serving leader of the opposition, he is best known for representing the working class and for being at the forefront of the struggle for unity.
The great emotional satisfaction you get when you do something and you know you have made people happy. You do something to make people happy, you get tremendous emotional satisfaction. I got enormous emotional satisfaction from pulling sugar workers of extreme and excruciating poverty.
To instill hope, to struggle, Panday began speaking to sugar workers in a language they could relate to.
When I came into the sugar industry in '72, the sugar work, the labourer in the sugar industry was getting 63 cents an hour, $5.04 a day. And the tasks were very long, hard tasks that they had to perform. And they were very poor. Many of them still had and lived in carrot houses. You know, those houses that mud walls and carrot. Many of them still live there. Some of them, of course, had board houses and so on. I don't believe any had a concrete house, but that's the kind of poverty that existed. But it was not the economic poverty, but was the spiritual poverty, in that they had lost hope. They had resorted to their religion to justify their position. And some of them would say, well, what are we going to do? God put we so. So they say, they can't help because God put them so. There's no point in struggling with. And that, I think, was the worst part of it. The loss of hope, the loss of the will to fight. Because they had Basdeo. And Basdeo wasn't a trade unionist that encouraged them to fight. In fact, Basdeo encouraged them not to fight and inflicted great punishment upon them if they would strike against the company and so on. So that they were really demoralized in a way that is almost unbelievable. And that was the task I really had. The task I had was first to make them feel that they had a right to struggle and a right to a better life. And God didn't put them through. They put themselves that way. And if they fight, they will get a better life.
The fight for guaranteed work was just the beginning of Panday's struggle with sugar workers.
In my speeches, I began making references to Christianity, but Jesus would say, and I'd make reference to Ram and Krishna, and make reference to the prophet, you know. And that is what they understood. And not only that, it made them feel a kind of camaraderie. That there I was speaking to them in all the religions. After a couple of years of that, they began to show signs of unity.
With United Sugar Workers under his stewardship, Panday led the fight for guaranteed work.
And the sugar workers were poor because not only were their wages low, but they only worked for half the year. This problem was not merely a problem of wages, it was a problem of work. So we decided that the first thing to do was to fight for guaranteed work. That is to say, you can't work us for 6 months of the year and discard us for another 6. We demand that you employ us during the wet season.
Mr. Panday understood that people had to eat, people had to live, and he could not have sustained any prolonged period of strike because he felt that the workers would break and they had to earn.
And he developed a brilliant strategy where the workers could go on strike and still survive economically. A 1 week on, 1 week off.
And the idea being is we'd get pay for 1 week and we would stretch the pay as far as we could stretch it. over the 2 weeks. Hunger began setting in. We couldn't live like that. But the strike was effective, enormously effective, because when we strike, the sugar, when they're boiling the sugar in the pan and so on, would all congeal and freeze up. And Monday morning, they'd have to chisel it out and that sort of thing. So it was very effective. Eventually, the strike was successful and the company caved in. They decided they will give us work in the wet season for about 9 months instead of 6.
Mr. Panday emerged as a real warrior, one who had come to actually provide salvation for those who worked in the sugar industry.
The fight for guaranteed work was just the beginning of Panday's struggle with sugar workers.
Well, as I say, the idea was to get them out of poverty. So when we got guaranteed work in 74, we decided, right, now we'll raise the pay. And we began a fight. We say that we want equality. And the equality we wanted was, we wanted equal pay with the URP. We said we were working hard, they are doing nothing. And we want therefore equal pay. So this fight for equality now. We began to ask for 100% increase. We eventually got the 100%, but 100% meant those people who would get $5 a day will get $10 a day. But it was, we got the 100%. When we got the 100%, of course, sugar workers got back pay. And again, that desire to live was so much that we have stories of people buying fridge and can't get it through the door because the house is so small, things like that.
Remembering that education was the way out of poverty for him, he was also concerned about the children of sugar workers.
They got $3.99 to cut and bundle a ton of cane. So they had to cut and bundle 2 tons of cane in order to qualify for a day's work. Now the father and the mother were both cane cutters. So the father could do it. But the mother, she's weaker and she couldn't do it. So she used to take the children with her into the cane fields. And while she cut, they would bundle. And so she was able to also reach 2 tons per day. But that meant that the children were in the cane fields. I began another struggle with the company. Began to fight them, threaten them, telling them that as a lawyer, if a child got damaged, I was going to bring open compensation cases against them. The sugar workers didn't want me to fight for that. Pretty. How they would get less pay, you see, because the children, the mother wouldn't be able to cut and bundle 2 tons of cane. But we eventually got the company to ban children from coming into the field. And that meant that once they left the field, they went to school. And when they went to school, they eventually went to secondary school. And some of them went to university.
Today, Basdeo Panday says that this period of struggle was the most significant.
Most exciting period of my life was that. And I believe that it is the period in which I achieved the greatest. Because what I did was I brought thousands of people out of grinding poverty into some kind of a respectable living.
While fighting for better conditions for sugar workers, Panday was also championing the cause of uniting the working class.
The Workers' and Farmers' Party was a party that tried to break the racial voting. We said that the society was divided with a line running down the middle, with Africans on one side and Indians on the other side. But we said that is false. The line is really drawn this way, with Indians and Africans up there, oppressing Indians and Africans down below here. And if we could unite the Indians and Africans of the working class, that's the trouble. And that is what we sought to do with the Workers' and Farmers' Party. The very name indicates its philosophy, Workers' and Farmers' Party. Of course, we fell between 2 stools. because the racial voting was so intense that we created a record. I think there were 36 seats at the time, and we lost 36 of us lost our deposits, I think. But we struggled on. We were trying again in 75 to unite the races, and to unite the races of the working class. Sugar was Indian and oil was African, conceptually and partially. So we began speaking of uniting oil and sugar and so on. And I remember someone from PNM saying, oil and sugar can't mix. You can't mix oil and sugar. And I retorted by saying, who says so? As far as I know, when you mix oil with sugar, you get sweet oil. Huh?
Joining forces with other trade unions, Panday was instrumental in creating a massive workers' movement.
I was, at that time, 26 years old, and I was meeting a vibrant trade unionist. At that time he had long black hair, wore boots, and immediately he said to me, if you want to get involved in politics, you have to get involved in struggle. So he gave me a lecture.
He was struggling for peace, bread, and justice. This was our campaign slogan. And let's emphasize the word peace. We didn't want violence. We didn't want conflict. But we wanted bread and justice for our people.
18th of February 1975, the four leaders were having public meetings and in several parts of the country, and they saw that the response was growing and growing rapidly. And they called this mass rally on a weekday in Skinner Park. And to their surprise, I would say, because I was amongst them, we had anything like 30,000 workers gathering in Skinner Park.
There was a confluence of workers' struggles. I was struggling for 100% in the sugar industry. George Hicks was struggling for a wage increase. Joe Young with the PTSC, Transport Union, Basdeo with the hotels and so on. And there was a confluence of workers' struggle. And we decided that all of us will come together and we will march to Port of Spain as a demonstration of the recalcitrance of the parasitic oligarchy, the employers, you see. So when we reached opposite the Susamachar Church on Coffee Street there we confronted the police. The police confronted us and they began just shooting tear gas, rushing in there and beating up people and so on and so forth. Some of us stumbled on, myself, Humphrey. Some of them were held, beaten, imprisoned, including Fernand Jamada, George Weeks, Black Kelshaw, a whole lot of them.
But I was also charged with illegal marching. My attorney was Basdeo, and it was very funny because he was in the dock with all the prisoners. And when they called my name, he had to jump over the barrier and go before the magistrate to represent me. And he did a first-class job because I was reprimanded and discharged, and then he was fined. And he and George decided they were not paying the fine, they were going to take prison as part of the struggle.
That bloody Tuesday indicated to us that we can achieve all the benefits for the workers which can be wiped out by one stroke of the political pen. And we realized that the trade union struggle had to become involved in politics. And it is that engineered the United Labour Front.
The United Labour Front contested the 1976 general election and succeeded in displacing the opposition DLP. Basdeo Panday emerged as a Member of Parliament, coming up against Prime Minister Dr. Eric Williams.
Working with Williams was not a difficult thing. He was a very pleasant man, erudite, educated, witty, gentle. He was nice. We got along very well as people. But when we had battles to fight, we fought them. I fought them very bitterly, actually.
Although new to Parliament, the opposition proved themselves to be a formidable team.
I went there, I was leader of the opposition, and we went there, and we battled with them. And we had an enormous team of men. George was in the Senate, but we had Rafiq Shah, we had myself. But we had great debaters, because they were all trade unionists, or influenced by trade union, or involved with the trade union, and therefore they were very good speakers.
Soon, disagreements within the ULF resulted in changes in the leadership in Parliament.
The working peoples had expressed their confidence in the ULF. And suddenly, party leaders were concerned now about ideology.
When the ULF was first formed, your trade union leaders had different ideological perspectives. Some of them were Marxian, and even among the Marxists there was division, because some Moscow and some Peking, in other words, Soviet Union and China.
So that debate flared up within the party, and you had people beginning to form cliques and cabals.
Baz was definitely not a communist. You could say a type of socialist, a democratic socialist. But he did not want a communist-type party to be born out of the Skinner Park rally. He wanted a grassroots, mass, people's-supported party. And that is where we split. He got control of the ULF, and he had a fight for the opposition leadership in Parliament. But eventually he got control of that as well.
But it had taken its toll on the ULF, and Mr. Panday and those who stayed with him, we had to rebuild. And that is how Mr. Panday's political party became, once, for the first time, it became purely sugar-based. And Mr. Panday had to get out of that to have national appeal across the nation. And that was another phase of his struggle as a political leader.
There is one history that no one can deny, and that is my struggle to unite the races, to get rid of racism in this country.
And then what he did is he created a common front that we call the National Alliance of Trinidad and Tobago, that included the Tapia House movement led by Lloyd Best and the DAC led by A.N.R. Robinson. Mainly the two Tobago seats were involved there. And then we took that coalition into a wider coalition with the ONR led by Carl Hudson Phillips, and we founded the National Alliance for Reconstruction. So that was an extremely important event.
The question of who would lead came up. And Robinson made it absolutely clear that if he's not leading, he's not going to be part of it. And in my own mind, I thought that the country was not ready for an Indian leader. We were trying to beat the PNM that had been in power for about 30 years. And the shock could be too much for the nation. So I eliminated myself. As far as Carl Phillips was concerned, I thought that the I Freed Carl syndrome had become very heavy. That is, Carl introduced some law, and the whole country feared him in a way. I Freed Carl. That was something that was being bandied about all the time. So I thought that that is baggage which is too heavy to carry. Robinson was maintaining that if he was not leader, he would not be part of it. So I decided to be Robinson. Carl has never forgiven me for that.
Lloyd Best argued, as best he could, that we should make the NAR what he described as a party of parties. Now, we discussed that and we agreed that a coalition government is what we really needed. But Robinson is the one who said unitary party and nothing else. In fact, at 0 hour, he threatened that if we didn't go with the unitary party, he was pulling out. So we made the concession. At that stage, Lloyd Best withdrew because he actually said it, that we're not going to last. Anyway, we won the election with a resounding victory. I don't think many democracies in the world can boast of that kind of victory. But it didn't last because Mr. Robinson, as the leader of a unitary party, operating with the constitution that we have, which gives absolute power to the Prime Minister, became a dictator.
When we entered the NAR, we made it very clear that the thing we're fighting for is equality. We want equality. We end up to discrimination. These are the things basic to us. Robinson agreed, of course, that's what we're fighting for. The moment we got into power, Robinson forgot everything about equality. And in fact, I think about 3 months after, brought a list of people for boards and all that sort of thing, of almost 100 names, with 2 Indians on it. And of course, we began to say this can't work. That you have to redress the imbalance on the state boards. We are not asking you for any kind of favor or patronage, but surely you can find the Indians who are capable. We're not asking you to put sinecure there and so on. And that began to develop into a great dispute.
Within a year of being elected to government, the NAR was split.
I was the first to be fired. But I was fired not because they wanted to get rid of me. I was fired because they wanted to get rid of Baz. We promised also the tri-sector partnership in ownership of capital. Now these things just were never delivered. And Mr. Robinson as leader took decisions without consultation with the other leaders to take away reduce their salaries, take away COLA, and this sort of thing, to devalue the money. This was a ridiculous strategy.
But eventually fired all of us from the government, and then expelled us from the party. When he fired us from the NAR, of course, we didn't lie down, roll over and die.
Although Basdeo Panday and others had been fired from the government, they remained members of parliament and formed the opposition in 1988, replacing the PNM, who only had 3 seats.
In 1988, we formed a club. We called it Club 88. Then we had a massive rally in Oranguez. And tens of thousands of people told us, form a party. So what we did is say, okay, we will form the party. We invited the members to suggest a name and a symbol, and it came out of the membership. 2 people had suggested the rising sun as a symbol. I took the suggestion, designed it, and I designed it in a very special way, that the rising sun would eventually rise and become the blazing sun. So we're the ones that really laid the groundwork, and led by Mr. Panday all the way.
By July 1990, the NAR government suffered another serious setback when the Jamaat al-Muslimin, an extremist Islamic group, staged an attempted coup.
I was nursing this open heart surgery, and I would go to Parliament, and at tea time, 4 o'clock, I would leave and go home, get my medication, what I have to do and so on. So on that Friday, I did exactly that. And I remember it very well, I remember it because I was also invited to the wine and cheese party of the lawyers. The lawyers at the end of term always have a wine and cheese party, and that was that would be at the Hall of Justice. And when I came out of the Parliament at tea time, 4:30, I said, I wonder if I should go to the wine and cheese party. But I wasn't feeling well, and I said, no, I go home. And I went home. I took my medication and so on, and I went to sleep. Okay, and I am sleeping, and while I'm sleeping, I was shaking. Wake up! Leave me alone. Wake up! Wake up, man! Abu Bakr taking over the country. I said, well, when you finish, I'm waking up. And that has stuck. That is the context in which that was said. And fellas say, well, you see Panday in your vote.
In December 1991, the UNC contested its first general election, winning 13 of the 36 seats in Parliament.
We went into that election as the UNC, right? And the UNC was very popular. But again, we mobilized the rank and file. I don't think we would have had much support from the parasitic oligarchy, the elite in the society. They were PNM. But I think we had mobilized enough support, and people had trusted us. We had been in the trenches with them. We had gone through all kinds of things. We'd been imprisoned for fighting for them. I think all of that put together, we gave them confidence in that they trusted us, and we gave them hope.
In the 1995 general election, through an accommodation, the UNC gained the majority, and Basdeo Panday emerged as the 5th Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago.
In 1995, it was the UNC on its own now, without any other parties swelling the ranks or adding much variety on the stage. And at that time, serious questions were being raised as to whether he could win the elections by himself. And it turned out that it was 17-17-2. So that he had made major breakthroughs, having picked up the Sama Barataria seat and the St. Joseph constituency. And of course, the rest is history. The 2 seats in Tobago, there was an agreement between Mr. Robinson himself. The fact that he could have negotiated a deal with Mr. Robinson has to be credited to his acumen and sagacity and intelligence.
I am satisfied that 5 years under Prime Minister Basdeo Panday is the best government this country has ever had.
We came into the campaign with crime being the most serious problem, and it was. And we said we're going to deal with crime. And we brought crime down to, I think, the lowest level it has ever been in this country. So that we came into office and realized that about 10,000 children every year were literally being thrown on the dung heap by something called the Common Entrance Exam. And they would say, we have to go on like this. We have to put those children on the dung heap because we don't have space. The simple logical answer was to build schools. So we went and built 34 secondary schools. And we built them all over the place. And we abolished the Common Entrance Exam. And they introduced the SEA, which was not to exclude anybody, because every child gets a secondary education. Another problem we faced when we came was unemployment. Unemployment, I recall, was 18% unemployment. And we brought unemployment down within a couple of years. We brought unemployment from 18% to 10%. And we were hoping to go into single digits.
Under the leadership of Basdeo Panday, the UNC went on to win the 2000 general election.
The Panday administration had a great deal to be proud of and to shout about, because the country had seen in his first term that here was a government that really subscribed to the view that performance beat old talk every time. I think that was the slogan after the end of the term. So that because of the enormous success of the government, now he was elected for a second term as Prime Minister without having to depend on any coalition partners.
It was a short-lived term, as internal strife within the UNC forced another election within a year.
There we were in government, and the attorney, I decided I'd move the Attorney General. And when I moved the Attorney General, he conspired with two other persons. Trevor was one, Trevor wasn't fired. He keeps saying that, but he wasn't fired. And neither was Ross Barrage. But what they decided is that they'll vote against the government. And they began voting against the government in Parliament. So here you had a government who couldn't pass this. So that brought the government, brought the government down, because we had 19 seats and so on. And every time a legislation comes, they'd vote against the legislation. They even voted against adjourning the Parliament. You know, when this be resolved that this Parliament be now be adjourned, they voted against it. And the Speaker had to actually defy, because they are now the majority, defy the majority and get up and leave and go. In a situation like that, when you can't run the government, it is deceitful to remain in government. And so we got the elections, and the result was 1818.
The 2001 general election resulted in a tie between the UNC and the PNM.
The Constitution says that in a situation like that, the President will determine who is the Prime Minister. That's what the Constitution says. Now, our tradition, however, is the British tradition, the British parliamentary tradition, the cabinet system tradition, and so on. And the learning on that is that if you have a sitting Prime Minister and an occasion like this arise, what you do is you call the Prime Minister and says, go and form a government. If he cannot form a government, then you call upon the opposition leaders. You go and form a government. And that is how it's done. Robinson, moral and spiritual values and talking all this foolishness, decided that he's going to choose Manning. Although we got more votes. We got more votes in the PNM. So he chose a minority party to run the government. And that was totally in breach of the Constitution and the spirit of the Constitution.
Basdeo Panday went on to serve 2 more terms as leader of the opposition before bowing out of electoral politics.
First of all, I said, if you are going to represent people, if you're going to be Prime Minister or Minister and so on, you must be prepared to genuinely represent people. As I got older, I realized I was losing the strength that was necessary to properly serve people. As an electoral person, as a minister, Prime Minister, whatever, even parliamentarian. And therefore I decided that I will opt out of electoral politics. But politics has been my life. And I've always argued that there's more than one dimension to politics. It's not only electoral. Politics doesn't only mean going up for elections. And so politics for me has always been an activity that meant making other people happy, which is the purpose of life.
His hallmark really is to have to have moved, to have brought the various classes together. He was seen as a working class leader, basically a sugar working class trade union leader. But he was able to work with the business community that perhaps initially feared having a prime minister who in the earlier times would be described as socialist and communist and so on. Here was a person who said that I am going to respect the Constitution, and therefore no one group is going to be left out.
You would have seen policies that were implemented through which communities that were neglected by former regimes, more particularly the PNM, you saw development more on a nationalistic scale rather than just development concentrated on certain strongholds of whichever political party. It was a change, and I would say that Mr. Panday portrayed himself and projected himself as a true national leader for all the peoples.
I would say that Basdeo Panday is one of the Caribbean great politicians, and you can think of Jamaica and Manley, you think of Barbados with Barrow, you can think of Guyana with Jagan. Baz is in that caliber of politician, and I don't care what is done, what criticisms are leveled, history is going to present him as that icon of Caribbean politics.
By the end of 2010, the former Prime Minister, continuing the work that he had done for 40 years, launched the Basdeo Panday Foundation.
People come and they need advice, and I give them advice, try to comfort them, try to make them happy in one way and so on. They come to me sometimes with their personal problems. And you give advice, you try to help. And that for me is politics. Because when I was in the trade union movement, for me my action was political. Because I was struggling to make other people's lives happy. So politics has always been a struggle to make people's lives happy. And it doesn't have to be electoral, it could be non-electoral, which is what I'm doing right now.